Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am Kirsty and this is Stuck in the Mud. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about hormones and how they have the effects on obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety, because this is something I think has been a big factor in my journey with OCD throughout my life. It's something that I've noticed has become more apparent in recent times, and as I was talking about having a bit of a relapse into some compulsions recently, I felt I was taking a step back in my healing journey, in my recovery. But I started to join the dots together, and this is something that's talked about a lot more these days. But the effects of our monthly cycle on obsessive compulsive disorder and how it can heighten those symptoms. And yeah, it's something I have often noticed around the premenstrual period, and I've definitely noticed an increase in my symptoms of anxiety and intrusive thoughts. I've definitely felt them become more regular. I am 44 now, so I've also questioned the effects of perimenopause on my anxiety and OCD and how it seems to have risen. And because of those hormonal fluctuations throughout the month, I think it's definitely tied into why we see an increase in symptoms of anxiety and OCD. It's definitely something I've noticed more recently, but then something I will discuss more in future videos is the effects of menopause and perimenopause on the symptoms of OCD and anxiety and depression. So going back to the whole hormonal thing, yeah, I did notice it growing up with obsessive compulsive disorder. I often saw a spike in intrusions around the premenstrual period. That was something that was quite regular for me. And I also brought this up with my therapist because I said I definitely feel worse at these times, and I wondered if this was something any of you noticed. I would often get those catastrophizing thoughts, and it would lead me back into some difficult compulsions, and I would definitely see an uptick in those around this time, and it became quite noticeable every month, and it was like clockwork. But then as I became more aware of this and I was more aware of these points in my cycle, I became a lot more aware of when it was going to happen. So when it did happen, it didn't take me by surprise, and I would just treat those thoughts the same, those intrusions, and let them be there. Although it may feel more difficult at certain times of the month, I certainly found it more difficult at the premenstrual point in my cycle. So there's definitely a correlation there. There's definitely a link, and I think it's talked about a lot more these days. And I know that, as my therapist said, she found this with lots of women, and I think it's important to recognize those points. And like I say, maybe becoming more aware of our cycles and when these things may happen. But I know that's not always easy for everyone, because not everyone has a very regular cycle. I have been fortunate to have that, and I was very aware of when these changes were going to happen and when they might happen. And some months probably were easier than others, but certainly some months were very difficult. So when I became more aware of these thoughts, I would treat them all the same. It can be anything, any thought. So I would be aware of it and let it be there and have as little involvement with it as possible, because they all just want to suck you in. And it may be more difficult at certain times of the month. I definitely found that. I definitely find it now. As I said, maybe it's an age thing, maybe it is going into that whole perimenopause thing, but I'm trying to be still aware of when that might happen. And I think the reason I've struggled a lot more recently, because it can be very irregular. It's not certainly just before a period or, at the certain times of the month. It can be quite erratic sometimes. And I think that's what I've struggled with in the last year or two since having my last daughter. And I've heard experts talking about this, where they're talking about hormonal fluctuations, and when they happen, this can exacerbate symptoms of OCD and anxiety and depression. So I'm trying to be gentle and kind with myself and be aware that that's what it's about, because I think it's very easy to go along the catastrophizing route, and especially when it's to do with your health, your body, I think you can get quite anxious about that, and it can lead to thoughts of what's wrong, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling like this? And it can lead to symptoms of health anxiety, and you also may even feel physical symptoms like dizziness. That is something that affects me at certain points of my cycle, and it can be quite scary when things like that happen. So you start to question, but I'm trying to be aware that this is all normal. If there was anything that wasn't, I'd certainly, speak to a doctor, but I know that I've always had these fluctuations, and I felt differently with my OCD and anxiety. So let me know in the comments if you have noticed this with your cycle. Have you noticed a difference with your age as you've aged? Have you noticed that the symptoms have changed with your anxiety and OCD? Let me know, I'd be interested to hear. But thank you for watching. I hope to discuss this in more detail in future videos, because it's something that I feel like that is affecting me right now, and I'm sure it's affecting other people. So thanks for watching, and remember, you are not your thoughts, you are so much more. See you next time.